Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Microsoft Power BI UK user group. I'm your host Leon Gordon, and we're back again for the first time in 2023 with you all to bring you an opportunity to come together as a community to learn more about what we love, data and Power BI. Unfortunately, my co-host Pragati Jain will be joining us shortly. She has a work requirement, which means that she'll be with us as we go through today's session. But please do let us know where you're joining us from. I know that we've got Andy joining us from Somerset already. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from in the UK and overseas as well. Today is proven to be a very popular subject, and I'm very looking forward to today's session as well. Just to set some ground rules, we do want this to be as interactive as possible, so please do feel free to ask questions throughout. And again, if we can't answer the question on today's live, then we can come back to it outside of today as well. So without any further ado, today we're looking at the billion row Power BI profit and loss with fellow MVP Chris Barber. Now, Chris is a manager at analytics experience at Avanade and a chartered accountant. He's also, as I mentioned, a Microsoft MVP, consultant and the owner of starschema.co.uk. It's my pleasure to bring Chris on with us now. So Chris, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, Leon, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. And obviously very glad to be with you all. Nice to hear we've got people from Somerset. That's actually where I grew up. So yeah, it's nice to know we've got people locally. And yeah, really looking forward to doing the session today with you all.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. I'll hand straight over to you to jump into your session.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for those of you joining live, and thank you for those of you who are kind of watching this on repeat. So today we're going to talk about the billion row Power BI P&L statement. And the first thing I kind of really want to talk to you about is that people often get misled thinking that producing P&Ls in Power BI is an easy thing to do. And the first thing I'll say to you is it's not a straightforward and simple thing to do, right? There's lots and lots of different challenges. There's range to create your kind of own titles, to dealing with ragged hierarchies, to dealing with things like having to do different number formats. So there's lots and lots of challenges when producing P&L statements. The fortunate thing is that although there's lots of challenges with those things, all the companies that we work with have to produce financial statements in a very kind of rigorous way, right? So a Microsoft P&L, a Unilever P&L, all of these companies, they have to adhere to things like accounting standards, either IFRS or US GAAP. And what this does is this means that when we produce P&L statements, we can follow the same kind of a rough modeling technique and same kind of approach for all of these different companies, right? And there are sort of nuances and different things, but what I'm saying is, though, the problem is very difficult. The problem's difficult in the same way, and you can kind of leverage known techniques and you can build things through. Okay, with that said, I'm going to start off today's session by doing a little bit of a demo. So we're going to just have a bit of a demo, a bit of a play around. Once we've had the demo, we're then going to go and talk about how we end up scaling to these kind of volumes of data, right? How do we end up with a billion rows, right? And actually, it can happen a lot quicker than you expect as soon as you start slicing and dicing your data in different ways. We're going to do a bit of an Excel run through as well, just to show you the integration with Excel. Anybody working in finance will be aware that obviously Excel is a key tool, right? So if you can't integrate your solution with Excel, generally it will be abandoned. So it's really important to have that integration. And because Power BI is a Microsoft product like Excel, the two work really nicely together. And there's a few things that you can set up. We'll run through kind of modeling technique and approach, and there's quite a lot to cover in that area. And I'm also going to cover on how the aggregations themselves work. And then I'll do a brief sort of recap, and we'll have a quick look at the course that I've got available, which is entirely and you can access through my website. Okay, with that said, let's have a quick look at our demo. Okay, so I'm going to start off within Power BI Desktop. So here we have our P&L statement that we're going to be looking at today. So there's a few kind of key things to point out here. We've got our P&L here on the left-hand side. I've somehow changed the color here to yellow. And notice here, we've got all the various different things that I mentioned. So we've got a ragged hierarchy. So for example, returns and adjustments is broken out into returns and adjustments, but cost of sales is just done at the level 1 of the hierarchy. Notice also we've got different formatting strings, which we're going to talk about. So here we have a percentage in the same column as we have an absolute number. And we're also actually able to flip between these numbers and look at whether we want to display them in millions and thousands, or whether we want to take away all that together. Another key thing with your solution is quite often you'll want multiple different layouts for your P&L. So although it's the same number, it's the same put together, all in all, what will actually end up happening is somebody might want to view it slightly differently, a more consolidated view, for example, than somebody else. Okay, so with that, let's have a quick look at how we kind of scale up to 1 billion rows. And I'm going to kind of explain the thought process behind this in a little bit, but I want to show you it working first. So we're able to slice and dice our data in 3 main different ways here. We're able to slice and dice our data by customer. We're able to slice and dice our data by product. And we're able to slice and dice our data by the time in which the sale occurred. I've got a couple of tables here at the bottom, which are just going to quickly show you the table that's actually being queried and the number of rows that are in that table. And I will show you more detail about this as we go through. But at the moment, we're only looking at date as a way that we're slicing our data, right? Because we've got our February, March, April, May, etc. across the columns. Let's now, first of all, just change that over by just having a look at a customer. And we'll see that the table being queried changes, and we're accessing a greater number of volume of rows because we're now including the customer dimension. So I'm just going to pick a single customer just at random. So let's pick Blending Works, which is a company I've got here. All of this data is obviously made up, and there is nothing in here which is real, but it is a fair representation. Notice how now, as soon as we start including customer, we're now querying a much larger table of data. So we've now got 470,000 rows of data. And as we keep going through, and we also select a product, we'll see as that query and that table will increase further. So this company sells various different bicycling equipment. So they sell various different cassettes. So if we now say just select a single cassette in our product, we'll hopefully see that the volume of number of rows in our table will increase. Now we're up to 9.4 million. And if we include the time dimension into our model.
Hi Chris, sorry to just jump in very briefly. We're getting a little bit of blur coming through on the screen resolution. Is it possible to either try to zoom or just adjust the resolutions slightly, please?
Yeah. Okay, what I might do, Leon, is turn off OBS and just record in. Use a handle just for 2 seconds while I just reboot the camera and everything, and I'll come back.
Yeah, of course. No problem whatsoever. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody, for your feedback there. Obviously, as always, we want this to be an opportunity for you to learn as much as possible. We know that financial reporting in Power BI is a very, very hot topic, and something that Chris mentioned earlier is not easy to achieve. So please do keep interacting with us throughout today's session. We want to ensure that Chris's wealth of information is passed across in the best way possible, and obviously we'll be back up and running for you as quickly as possible. In the meantime, I have looked through the comments and I can see that there are people joining us from all over the world. Lisbon, Portugal we have. We also have Norway joining us. We also have where we'd expect to see people from in the UK. We have Brisbane, Australia, which is fantastic. I'm not too sure what time it is in Australia at the moment in Brisbane, so please do let us know down under DAX. We also have Chantel joining us from Florida, Janisa from New Zealand as well. So it's great to see the attraction from a global audience, not just from everybody in the UK. Steve, great to see you. This did make me laugh, which is why I popped it on the screen. Who would have thought it? I saw a meme the other day, I think it was on LinkedIn, that shows the financial industry, and underneath it shows the whole industry being propped up by Excel 2013, which was a great chuckle. Looking forward to seeing you this evening, Steve. Alongside as well, I noticed Rishi had joined us, so Rishi, thank you for joining us as well, and looking forward to seeing you this evening too, alongside the other MVPs. We do have Chris back with us now, so I'll just go ahead and add Chris back to the stream, and let's see if we can rejoin from where we were. Excellent. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you. Apologies for that. Hopefully I'm a bit clearer now. I'm just going to present my screen back. Just let me know if it's blurry or if it's okay and you can see it.
Yeah, no problem at all.
So it should be sharing now.
Okay, excellent. Let me just bring this up. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, much better. I'll hand back to you, Chris, to carry on. Thank you very much for your support there.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking that. So apologies, everybody. Hopefully that's now a fair bit clearer, and I'm going to kind of resume from where I was. So here we are now. We're looking at our number of rows in the table, which is 1.13 billion row table within our statement. So we've got that here, which we're now querying. And that's because we're now slicing our data by customer, by product, and by time of sale. What I will say is that you can, if you want to, interact with this report yourself. So I've got this report embedded within my website. So if you want to actually go and have a play with it yourself, if you just go to starschema.co.uk and you go to Power BI reports, there's the billion row P&L. And if you go to that either on your mobile or on your desktop, you'll be able to access the report and you'll be able to have a play around and just see how that works for yourself as well. Okay, so I've kind of given a quick demo of how the report itself works. What I want to talk about now just briefly is the Excel integration that we want to do with our report. So that's the Power BI side of things, but there's also the Excel side of things as well. Okay, so many of you will know if you go to Power BI, you can simply choose to analyze in Excel, or you can go from Excel and you can analyze in Excel. And basically what ends up is you end up with this connection to a Power BI report or Power BI data model, and you can build up your report. Why this is really powerful is if you have your Excel connected to your Power BI, if the numbers change, your Excel will automatically update, and it stops you from having lots and lots of different versions of the truth within various different Excel workbooks. So if I quickly now just build out our statement, I'm going to show you a couple of the neat features that we can also have with our P&L. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in the filters. Now I've got something here. Oh, let's just refresh our pivot table. So what will happen is you will have to periodically refresh your Power BI, and that's because the connection will break if you haven't used it for a while. Okay, so into our filters, let's turn on financial formatting. And what this does is this actually formats our percentages correctly. Let's bring in as well a filter for customer and for date. Let's not worry about brand or item. I'm going to choose to include or exclude certain levels, and I'm going to pick a particular different layout version. So I mentioned before that you can have lots of different layout versions for your statement, and you can change the formatting. So if I just go to my browser version of my website, here we go. You can flick between no formatting, thousands, and millions, and you'll notice how the report updates. And that's the same in Excel, is that you can control the formatting for the percentages. And we've got the two different layouts as well. So layout 1 and layout 2. So in Excel, I'm just going to select layout 1 for now. Okay, so let's quickly just build up this pivot table just to show you how quick and easy it is to do once you have the model built and the report all working. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit because I imagine that's a little bit difficult for some of you to see. Okay, I'm just going to pick a single quarter of data. And I'm just going to say, just include those lines. And I'm going to pick that layout version 1 that I just showed on the browser. Okay. And then all we need to do is we need to make sure that we're looking at our level 1 and our level 2 of our hierarchy. And let's drag in our actuals. Great. So now we've got a P&L in Excel, which is linked to our Power BI report. And you can see here, for example, the gross profit is coming through in percentages. There's a few kind of neat things that are going on here. So for example, if I want to drill into more detail, so example, I want to know more about these returns, I can double click. And what will happen is that Excel will be able to drill in and give me more detail behind those rows. So it's just going to retrieve the data. And you can see here, it's now broken out that return number that I was looking at into the month. And you can control what this is done through using a tool called Tabular Editor. Let's just bring that up actually quickly. So I'm here using Tabular Editor 3, which is the paid version, but many of you will be using Tabular Editor 2, but it works in basically the same way. And what you can do is you can set something called a detailed row expression in DAX. And this detailed row expression controls the drill through that you get within Excel. So here, for example, I'm saying what I want to retrieve is level 1, level 2, the month, and the actual value. And if we just flip back to our Excel again, what we'll see is that's exactly what's been retrieved by that sort of double clicking on the result. Because that's one of the really nice integrations you can do with a large volume of data in Excel, right? Because if I'm working with Excel, I'm limited to the however many hundred thousands, I can't remember the exact number of records in Excel, but I can have a Power BI pivot table connected to my Excel, and I can have billions of data in the back, even though I can only drill into a specific number of rows when I'm in Excel, because it won't be able to handle the sheer volume.
Thanks, Chris. We do have a couple of questions coming in that seem on topic at the moment, so I'll just add Pragati in as well. Pragati, thank you for joining us. So the first question coming in is what you're going to show us today. This is from Paul Martin, using Power BI Premium per user, PPU, or Power BI Pro?
Yes, this is going to be using Power BI Premium per user. That tends to be how I interact with things, because you get the XMLA endpoints, so you can access it. Yeah, there's a fair bit more detail out there on licensing and different options, but yeah, I'm using Premium per user at the moment.
Fantastic. And Pragati, do you want to go on to our next question? I'll just bring it onto screen for us.
Sorry, I was on mute. So this is a question from Rishi. Is this using the format expression and calculation groups to get the different formats?
It is indeed. I'm going to show that a little bit later on. So there's different options in order to get your formatting. You can use calculation group format expressions, or you can use a DAX calculation called format. The limitation with the DAX format is that it converts everything to a text base. So it all looks lovely in Power BI, but actually, like I mentioned before, Excel integration is key for the finance community, and you don't want to be dealing with all of your numbers here being in text. It just makes it more awkward for those end users.
Thanks, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. That's all the questions for now.
Great. So I'm just going to show you a little bit extra with Excel. The next really, really cool thing you can do with Excel is we have the option to convert everything here to actual Excel formulas and point directly to the Power BI API. So if I go to the OLAP tools and I select convert to formulas, we'll get this kind of warning box up whether I want to convert the report filters. I'm going to just ignore that for now and just convert it as it is. Now, hopefully you'll see that it's now gathering all of the various different data. And now what I have, instead of a pivot table, is I have a standard formula, a normal Excel formula, and I can do anything I want with it. I can format it, I can put background colors, I can do anything that I want. The benefit of this formula, though, is that it will update whenever the numbers update. So that gives me an extreme amount of flexibility. And hopefully you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, that the formula is pointing towards the Power BI API. And this allows us an extreme amount of flexibility alongside the ability to have one version of the truth. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on today. But yeah, this gives us the extreme flexibility that we might want. Okay, so that's like a bit of a demo of how the solution works. And I want to talk about how we get up to this volume of data and how it actually happens that this ends up being the situation. I've lost my cursor. Apologies about that. Right, let's go back and let's just bring up our slides. Okay, so as I've mentioned, as you explain your P&L in different ways, the volume of the data drastically increases. I'm just going to give a bit of an explanation around that. So, for example, if you were just explaining gross revenue, your amount is 9.5 million, for example. We have a single row of data and 2 columns of data. However, as soon as I start to explain this in different ways, we're going to see that this drastically increases. So now say that I want to explain it by channel. Well, channel B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. Now you can see that I've included an extra column of data, but including an extra column of data also means that the number of rows in the solution also grows out. And this continues as I add more and more columns. So for example, if I've got 4 products, all of a sudden I start to expand out and now I have 8 rows of data because I want to explain my data by product. And that's why when we drill down from customer to item to time, you can see how quite quickly we go from needing a very large set of data if we want to be able to explain it in every which way possible. Just to emphasize that point, for example, if you have 100 customers, 50 products and 200 days, all of a sudden that will get you up to 1 million rows. So it doesn't take very long at all to get to a large volume of data. And here we're just talking about revenue, right? We're not talking about our entirety of our P&L. Okay, and I mentioned this around before when I looked at the Excel, but Power BI gives us one version of the truth, and Excel is really good for the ability to just create flexible numbers. So using the two together is a very, very powerful solution indeed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talking about the solution itself. And we're going to look firstly at sort of the principles behind the solution. And then I'm going to go through the modeling of the solution and how it all works together. I think it's important to say at this point is that there isn't a consensus in the BI community about the best way to produce Power BI P&Ls. I noticed there was a question from Rishi earlier. Rishi's got content on this and is working on content for this area. And it's actually talking SQL bits in this area. There's lots of other people. Bob Duffy, he's got some really good content. And there's also a lot of custom visuals out there around creating it. I think what I would say when it comes to building out a solution is you want to focus on this maxim, which is known from Matthew Roach. So this is very popular in the Power BI community, and I'm sure Leon and Pragati have come across this many times. But the principle is that your data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. And what does that actually mean in practice? Well, if we think about our solutions in Power BI we deliver, not just P&L, any solution, what are we actually doing? Well, we're inputting data into our solution. We are modeling that data once we've input it. We're then doing DAX calculations off the top of it. and we are visualizing it. So by doing transformations as far upstream as possible, from a Power BI perspective, you want to control as much as you possibly can through the inputs to the solution. So if you input a solution in, you don't want to then have to, every time something changes, right? Every time your finance team want a new financial layout, every time that they want to slightly change the general ledgers that roll up together, every time they want to add in or break out the P&L in a different way, you don't want to have to redo your modeling. You don't want to redo your DAX. And you don't want to redo your visualization. The ideal solution is to do it as far upstream as possible. So if your inputs into your solution contain all that information, that makes the solution more flexible and scalable. So that's the general principle around it. I'm going to quickly show you the input template here. So here we have the inputs into the model. Now this is a layout input sheet, and I'm just going to quickly drill in for you just so you can see it. But effectively, we're inputting our data in here. And as we input this data in, we could change these inputs and we would get a different output at the end of our solution without having to redo any DAX or redo anything else. So if we take as an example our returns and adjustments line, currently that is going to be summing up general ledgers 57,000 to 57,000. Now say that changed, and it does in organizations, they change which ledgers are mapping. You could say, okay, actually, I now want this to be 50,000, 57,000 to 50,000, I don't know, and 5, for example. And I can change my solution here at the input, and the whole solution will reflect. Okay, and that goes for all the other different types of calculations. And we've got 3 main types of calculations. The 3 main types of calculations are, we have sums. And everything is based on summing up general ledgers. Everything you do with P&L, you are summing up general ledgers. Okay, so that's really important when it comes for how we're going to work our aggregations later on. We then have subtotals, which say for the sums, we're going to add up, whichever sums we're going to put together. So we've got B2B revenue, B2C revenue, and intercompany revenue. Well, our total is going to be the combination of those 3. And the third main type of calculation we have is a percentage, which is basically dividing sums and totals over each other. So if we want gross profit percentage, for example. So by breaking up the DAX into these 3 different calculations, we can simplify our solution. We can tell at the input level what type of calculation it is, and the DAX will basically reflect whatever we want to do with that. I'm slightly simplifying it. There is usually a 4th type of calculation called EPS. EPS is earnings per share calculation. We're not going to touch upon that today because it's usually its own granularity. So earnings per share isn't something you'd usually look at by customer or by item or by time of day, right? EPS is an overall number, and it's usually contained within its own table of data. Okay, so let's go back to our solution and start actually going through how this all fits together. So as I mentioned, we've got 3 different types of calculation, and I'm just going to explain how they kind of fit together and how they work. So the 3 types of calculation are the sums, the subtotals, and the percentages. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly talk through how the sums work. The sum is a very basic calculation. Okay. It is simply a sum of our general ledger information. Okay. So we'll start off simple, and then we're going to ramp up in complexity and look at some of our other calculations. So how does our sum calculation work? Well, what happens is we have our layout table that I've just shown you in Excel. So this has our various different levels. So level 1 gross revenue is broken out into B2B and B2C, and we have a key associated with that. And if you've not done any modeling before, we always try and use keys, surrogate keys, foreign keys. You can kind of research all this stuff, but it's really essential element of the Kimball methodology. Our keys link through to a link table which contains the related general ledgers, and our general ledgers then relate through to an actual table. So for example, Power BI knows that when we are looking at B2B, we're talking about financial statement key 1, which is ledgers 50,000 in 1 and 50,000 in 2. And based on that, it can then go ahead and retrieve the appropriate value from our fact table being the ledgers. Okay, so that's nice and simple how our sums work. It gets slightly more complicated when we start to look at our subtotals. So for our subtotals, we are wanting to sum everything that's above. So for instance, here for our returns and adjustments, we've got returns and adjustments, but actually we want the total returns and adjustments number. So how is the model able to compute these numbers? Well, we do it using virtual relationships. In fact, let me show you the DAX before we go there, and then I will talk you through the modeling itself. So we are retrieving the sum, and like I said, everything is based off of the sum of general ledgers. But what we are doing is we are using a table here in order to change the filter context. That table is removing that relationship between the layout and the link table and creating a new relationship between a calculation logic and a link table. And I'm going to show you how that actually works in practice, because I know the DAX itself can be quite confusing. So we have an item such as total gross revenue, and that is related to 5 different ledgers for B2B, B2C, and intercompany. This calculation logic table that we've got within our model then creates a virtual relationship to tell us which ledgers to retrieve, and then that links through to the actuals. So basically using this calculation logic table, which tells us how our totals relate together, we can bring through all of our different ledgers. Okay. And that's how we retrieve our value. Okay, I realize I'm a little bit tight on time because of the technical issues. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to skip over the percentages and not talk through those. But they work in much the same way, and they're calculated very similarly. All that you end up doing is calculating the top and the bottom of your fraction. So if I quickly show you in the layout table. So with the subtotals, you basically have entered in that we want to sum up financial statement keys 1, 2, and 3. Ooh. If I don't actually delete it. Okay, let's pick the other one. So with our net invoice revenue, we're saying I want to sum up financial statements keys 1, 2, 3, and 6, which are B2B revenue, B2C, intercompany, and my discounts. And that's how the model is able to calculate through, because it's able to link these financial statement keys through to the link table. Like I mentioned, percentages work much the same way. And I'm not going to run you into the DAX, but I do have more information on my course about how this works. But basically, all you have to do is add in the numerator and the denominator, so the top and the bottom of the calculation. And then, let me zoom out a little bit. And when you do that, it's able to work out how the calculation works. So for example, for gross profit, we say that we're going to take key 15 and we're going to divide it by key 5. So key 15 being gross profit, and that's going to be divided by our total gross revenue. Okay, so everything, as I've mentioned, is input driven and everything works off of the sums eventually. Okay, so that is the crux of how the model and how the calculation all goes together. It doesn't, however, solve a bunch of the issues that Rishi mentioned earlier with regards to calculation groups. So within this model and within the inputs, we also tell the solution what format strings we want it to use. So here, for instance, you can see that we are telling the solution that we want it to use percentages for this row and millions for this row. Okay, and this then feeds into our calculation group format strings, which we're able to use in order to create the different formatting. So if I quickly go back to the solution, and we go to our income statement, these format strings that we're seeing here in thousands, in fact, we're looking at a single customer product, so let's get rid of thousands and just go to none. The format string being used here is based on that field of data. So again, like I mentioned, the input-driven approach is appropriate. Okay, Leon Pragati, I know we had a bit of a technical problem at the start. I'm a bit worried about time. Are there any questions at the moment? And then I will continue.
There are a few coming through. It wasn't just yourself with technical difficulties, Chris. We had a bit of echo coming from my microphone, so hopefully that's resolved now.
Yes, yeah.
Excellent. In terms of the questions coming through, we have more of a comment from Paul Martin. He mentions that several MVPs talk cube value. That's been picked up from one of the calculations that you showed us in Excel. But he thinks that we should state that cube value comes with a warning. The clue is cells saying getting data, and if your structures change in your COA, maintenance can become a real nightmare.
The abbreviation COA, sorry.
Again, we'd have to reach out to Paul for that. He doesn't stipulate. And in IT, as we all know, abbreviations can be taken out of context. So, Paul, please do feel free to elaborate on that slightly, and we can come back to it. And then, Pragati, the next question comes in from Daryl Lynch.
Yeah, so the next one coming from Daryl Lynch, he mentions, does the matrix of account check for duplication of accounts?
Okay, so just trying to interpret that question, I think what it's saying is if you've got a duplication of account, so you have general ledger 30,000 is related to revenue and to cost of sales, will it check for duplication? I think is what the question is saying. Please correct me in the comments if I'm incorrect. And no, it won't check for that. But really, you shouldn't have, if you're using a general ledger, unless your accounting system, you've got big issues with it, your general ledger should be used for a distinct purpose. There is a more complex scenario where your general ledgers change purpose over time. So for instance, something might relate to B2B revenue one year and B2C revenue the next year. And for this, we have a technique called slowly changing dimensions. You can read about this in the Kimball methodology. But basically, we have to then create unique keys within our model to enable us to deal with type 1 and type 2 slowly changing dimensions. It's quite a complicated topic to get into, but yes, ledgers move between accounts and you need type 2 slowly changing dimensions. It is a complicated thing to do, so check your theory before you get going down that road.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. And just to state, so Paul has circled back around to say that COA is chart of accounts. Is this something that you want to touch base on now, or in an effort to stay on time, do you want to circle back around at the end of the session?
Yes, so you would have to maintain, I'll answer it now, I think. So yes, if your chart of accounts changes, your Excel will change. It's kind of a feature and a problem, right, at the same time, right? Because what you want is your Excel to update when something changes, but you also want it to stay static. And that's why using these formulas is quite handy, because you can take a copy and you can have it then static, pasted. But yes, it is a problem because things change, but also you want it to change. So it's a blessing and a curse.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. That's all the questions for now.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to dive a little bit into how the aggregations work within the model now. Okay, as I've mentioned with the solution, absolutely everything works on summing up general ledgers. You're never going to do a different calculation, or I say never, you're very unlikely to do a different calculation other than summing them if your accounts are well maintained. Because like 50,000 to 50,005 might be your general ledgers. You're always going to want the sum of those when you're talking about revenue. You're never going to want the average, right? if you want that detail, you'll go down to the individual ledger. Because of that, we can actually build up sort of custom aggregations in order for this to work. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got various different aggregations. And let's go over to back. Okay. Okay, like I said, I'm going to skip through the percentage side. All of this is available on my course, so if you want to have a look at it, you can go ahead and do that. Oh. Okay, some slides there you weren't supposed to see, but there we go. Okay, so when we're talking about this particular solution, we're talking about breaking down our data by customer, time, and item, plus a date aggregation. So our solution, we need, in this instance, 6 different aggregation tables plus an aggregation table for date. So we've got an aggregation by customer, an aggregation by time, an aggregation by item, and we've got individual aggregations for those. But we also have an aggregation for customer and time, customer and item, and time and item. So we've got those as well. I just see the comment, Pragati. I'm going to tune my microphone down slightly. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so we've got 6 different aggregations, and we also have an aggregation by date as well. So if I go to my tabular editor, we have our different aggregation tables available to us. So here we have our aggregations by date, our aggregation by customer, customer and item, customer and time, item, item time, and time. So here's the smaller tables that we're using, because what we don't want to be doing is every time anybody has a question about our solution, we don't want to be creating that billion row table. Instead, what we want to be doing is we want to be able to pick the appropriate level of aggregation. Now, I'm actually managing this aggregation manually, purely because I can do it because it's quite a simple, straightforward calculation. So how are we actually managing this? So effectively what we have here is we have a set of variables in our DAX. The variables in the DAX are telling us which tables are filtered and which are not. Okay, so we're basically able to say, is this table filtered? Is this table filtered, etc. Based on that, we then have a switch statement, which says, if the appropriate level is filtered, return this sum, else return this sum. So if date only is filtered, it's saying, okay, just use the sum on date only. If customer and date are filtered, use the sum coming from that particular ledger for date and customer, and so on and so forth. And at the end, we just have our ledger actuals, which is our most granular level that we can get to. So basically, we'll try and hit an aggregation at every possible instance. If the user creates a filter selection that's so complex, you know, coming from item, date, time, everything else, what we're going to do is we're going to go right down to our detail aggregation, and we're going to pull that through. This is not typically how aggregations work within Power BI. You can use with direct, when you've got your fact table in direct query, you can use kind of standard aggregations and standard aggregation methodology. This model, however, is purely in import mode, which means we are loading all the data into the Vertipack engine for Power BI. So I'm managing it manually. But like I said, we're not doing complex calculations. We might do complex calculations on top of this, but as the base calculation, we can use quite a simple aggregation. Okay, that is how the solution is able to work and able to come through with all the various different levels. Hopefully that makes sense behind how and why it works. Okay, I've just got a couple of more things just to cover about. If you want to get more detail, what I will say is I'm not able to cover everything today, but on my website, I do have a course which has got a bit more detail around how to actually build out this P&L solution. So there is a course that you can sign up to. There's all the resources there, all the slides, the various different slides that I've shown today are there. And yeah, you can also have a go around with different embedded versions of the report as well. Okay, so I realize I'm at time, Leon, with quarter of an hour to go. So I think what I'll do is for the last quarter of an hour, I will open up questions. I can see there's more stuff coming through.
Yep, no problem at all, Chris. So I'm just getting the link for your course into the comments and chat. So I'll hand over to Pragati whilst I do that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So there was one comment from Rishi. I think when we were talking about the last comment from Paul on COA, I think Rishi mentioned the way to do this type of reporting is to use helper tables that have your financial statement layouts with formats or calculation type for each row.
Yes, that's effectively, hopefully what I was showing when I was showing the Excel is that the inputs themselves tell you what type of calculation and tell you all the various different pieces of information. So we have here whether the calculation type is a sum, a calculation, a subtotal, or a percentage. So yeah, it's managed through the inputs, but obviously if your ledgers change or if they move around, you can't just point to a ledger. That's when you need to get a bit more into the data engineering side of things.
Thanks, Chris. And then we have got a few comments coming through. One is coming from Donald Parrish, that always good to see examples of aggregations.
Thank you very much, Donald. Yes, aggregations are a fun topic and are definitely really powerful. I think it's one of those topics that was, the problem is that Microsoft is getting better and better by the day, right? They constantly have improved their engine. Therefore, you can get a better result without having to use aggregations. And I don't know everything, but I know it will be better in the future than it is today. So maybe it becomes less relevant, but I think for the foreseeable, it's still very useful to use aggregations.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think what else we have got? We have got another comment from Rishi there that he strongly recommends your course. So yeah, everyone go and definitely go and check out Chris' course.
Yes, the link to the course is in the chat as well. And please do feel free to ask us any questions around the content that we've gone through today. Chris, one topic I'm going to kind of steer the conversation towards, if I may, is why is it so difficult from a Power BI perspective? Obviously, the financial industry, like we've mentioned previously, is built on Excel, right? A lot of organizations use that as their database, for lack of a better term, their ETL tool, and obviously their visualization tool, whether it's tabular or visualized reports. So moving to Power BI, why is this not so straightforward at the moment, do you feel?
So I think the real crux of it lies in what a visual is actually doing. So for those of you who aren't aware, so obviously you have a visual. What it is doing is it's sending a query across to the Vertipack engine, which is a tabular-based engine, and then it's retrieving those results in order to display your visual. And therefore, it's limited by the way in which that engine basically works, or how tabular works as a modeling approach. It is not optimally designed to bring back and solve a lot of these issues, such as subtotals, etc. You can get around it in multiple different ways, and there's kind of workarounds, but it's just not optimally there. I think also, the calculations aren't working as people would expect. So for instance, when we look at the net revenue on a page such as this, it's not taking net invoiced and minusing, it's doing it a different way, right? It looks that way superficially, which is what would happen in Excel. The back end is not actually pulling through the data like that. So I think, if you go back to Kimball Data Warehouse Toolkit, chapter 11 or whatever it is, the actual kind of tabular modeling to get a result come through is actually quite complicated. There's ragged hierarchies, there's different formatting strings, there's all these kind of challenges which you'll come across.
Interesting. And I think that, sorry, we do have a question coming in, so I'll pause my question and I'll go to a question from the audience. So this one's coming in from Down Under DAX, and it is, what is your take on sorry, Pragati, we've got a bit of background noise coming through there from your side, so just perfect, thank you. What is your take on the Info River custom visual as a solution for P&Ls?
Yeah, it's very good. Obviously, the custom visuals, and there's other custom visuals out there, right? So I don't want to sound affiliated to any. So Zebra BI and Power On and Alteryx and lots of custom visuals are out there for P&Ls, and they are essential in certain aspects because you cannot achieve the required formatting you need without those custom visuals. What I would say is that they are not you just use a custom visual and all of your problems will be solved. You still need a good model in order to put your custom visual over the top of. And if you think it's going to solve everything for you as a silver bullet, I would urge you against any of those kind of views. They do some nice things for custom visuals, right? So InfoRiver, for example, allows you to add in subtotals. So you don't have to worry about having, you can just add in a row for percentage. You can just add in a row for your total gross. I think the one challenge with that is that once you start doing that, you're kind of ceding control. Your logic for your P&L is then held within a custom visual. And obviously quite a few organizations would rather hold that logic in their database, right, of how their P&L rolls up. And therefore, I think good modeling plus a custom visual over the top is a very valid solution, but don't think you can get away without good modeling. Certainly for more complicated solutions.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. And Profit Base have jumped in just as we're being custom visual agnostic. They've also mentioned that they have a financial reporting matrix visual as well. So thank you for coming through with that. So I will lead on to the question I was going to ask now, if that's okay. So I know that in this scenario, we've obviously gone through what is low-level master data management as such, in terms of the information we're putting into the spreadsheet to map to. Would you foresee in the future that this would be something that would be held in a database as opposed to Excel, or what are your thoughts from that perspective?
Yeah, certainly. So I've showed the data in Excel. In reality, the data is held in a database, right? Your general ledger data, I know Power BI can connect to SAP, or all these, various different other connections. But in reality, usually you're out of your ERP system into a database, and then from a database, you connect into Power BI. I think what might surprise a number of people is that your actual financial statement layout, as people want it, isn't always there within your ERP system, or is never there within your ERP system, in my experience, because they have a kind of a presentational layer that they want to apply over the top of it. So that logic doesn't usually exist within the ERP, but the actual, obviously, all of your ledger data, all the different ways in which you slice and dice your general ledger, whether it be legal entity or anything else, that should be coming from your ERP system directly, and you should be uploading your layout and everything into a database as well for proper management. Yeah, sorry, so I've showed Excel, but no, obviously, we don't use Excel as a data input for our financial reporting for a global company. That would be madness.
No, of course. I think it's good just to give everybody context, because there will be a lot of people that, as we mentioned before, Excel is the living, breathing entity of the financial operation as such, that will be doing the same. But just to kind of say that there's not a one size fits all, and there are other options available as well. We do have another question coming in from Jose and Antonio Fernandez Puga, and they ask, the first item in the profit and loss matrix is total gross revenue or gross revenue?
Well, you can do either, is the short answer. It depends on your company. So most organizations would show, the type of revenue and then a total line. Or, some might, I think if I bring up Microsoft's P&L, it will show the total and then it will show the detail below. So it really depends on how your organization want to display it. In the solution gives you the flexibility to do it either way. You just have to say, and move it around and just point it to a different area. So if I just quickly go back to the layout, at the moment, I've got total gross revenue appearing beneath B2B and B2C, but I could just as easily change this financial statement key, make it -1. It'll then appear at the top. As long as I'm still referencing keys 1, 2, and 3, total will work the same. So don't be whichever way you want to do it, whichever way your organization wants to do it is the short answer.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And we don't have any more questions coming in at the moment, but what I will ask everybody, as we ask this every session, is please take 15 seconds or so to fill out our anonymous feedback form to help us to continue to improve our webinars and also to suggest some future topics. So that is in both comments on LinkedIn and YouTube. So please do take the time to go ahead and fill that out for us, because your feedback does help us in terms of, so for example, having Chris with us today. We've been trying to do this for some time now, which I'm sure we will all agree, and we've actually made it happen. Being back with you for the first time in 2023 as well, as we've mentioned in the behind the scenes, we are dusting off some cobwebs as well. So please do feel free to provide us with your feedback, because it does help us to improve and to bring sessions that you actually want to hear and want to learn about as a community.
And definitely write in that feedback what kind of sessions you really want, so we can definitely try to bring that kind of content to you on our user group.
Definitely agreed. And I mean, in terms of questions, Chris, we've kind of gone through all of them that have been asked at the moment. But I personally want to say thank you on behalf of myself, Pragati, and the Microsoft Power BI UK user group, because this is a very hot topic within Power BI in the community, and we've had over 100 people participate to learn more with us today across platforms. So it's been an absolute pleasure in having you with us.
Great, thank you so much, Leon. Obviously, it's a pleasure to obviously both you and for those who don't know, we're actually going out for dinner later today, so with a bunch of other us. So
yeah,
obviously Pragati, I work with Pragati, and obviously it's a huge pleasure to come on as well. And
apologies, Chris. Apologies, I was a little late today due to a customer meeting at last moment, but yeah, I hope your session really went well.
No, it happens to all of us. But thank you so much, Leon. Thank you, Pragati, really appreciate it. And I look forward to catching up with you later.
Oh, definitely. Much appreciated, Chris. And as Chris mentioned, just while we close up the rest of the session, we are getting together as a UK MVP group today. It's a very subset amount of us, some of us meeting in person for the first time. I mentioned to Chris earlier, obviously myself and Chris have never actually met, although we've interacted quite a lot over the past few years. Myself and Pragati have actually founded and managed the Microsoft Power BI UK user group for the last 3 years, and we've actually never met face to face until what will be later this evening. So it's going to be fantastic to meet up with both yourself, Pragati, and the rest of the MVPs. I haven't had a chance to meet face to face yet.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to this evening, Leon, because as you said, we have been connected for some time online, virtually doing things together, but never got a chance to see each other face to face. So definitely looking forward to this evening.
Likewise. And thank you everybody in the community that's taken the time out of your day today to come and learn with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to be back with you. We do have a session which will be scheduled shortly for next week, so please do stay tuned. As always, thank you, Chris Barber, for joining us today as well. And this session has been brought to you in association with Pomerol Partners, so please do look for pomerolpartners.com and follow them as well. As always, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us at the Microsoft Power BI UK user group. Stay safe.